come over here for about a fortnight, haven't you, to meet up with the 100th bomb group, and Jim did a presentation there, I believe. Is that right, Jim?
Yes.
Yeah. And he's also been meeting up with Bill and our Mike, and has been finding out more about where his father actually crashed at Ludham Airfield during World War II. So Jim's got a presentation to show us, so I'm not going to say no more. I'm going to hand you over to Jim Blakely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. How many of you have been to the 100th Bomb Group Museum? Oh, lots. Okay, well, hopefully more of you will come. I want to thank Terry, Nigel, Mike, Bill, and most of all my wife for getting me here and helping me with this. But I'm a semi-retired radiologist. I'm a physician in Dallas, Texas. I've been there for 42 years. I've been married for 42 years to the same wife. We have two children, four granddaughters, and my father was a pilot with the 8th Air Force and 100th Bomb Group during World War II. And I'd like to start off by thanking the British people for essentially being the only country up against Hitler during World War II from May of 1940 until we got involved in 1942, 1943. You stood alone in the Battle of Britain, which was the most fierce air-to-air combat ever against the Nazis. You were outnumbered. You used smarts. You used the chain home radar to vector your fighters to the Messerschmitts and the Focke-Wulfs and the other planes coming to drop bombs on your country. I noticed there were a few bombs even dropped in Norwich. Maybe more around here. I think they said there was one on the Ludham Airfield, at least one. And so, although this was not heavily bombed, you were a big part of the war. Cotteshall Air Base, of course, was your fighter base, and Ludham Field was your auxiliary field. And I hope I'm not repeating too much that you don't already know, but I can't take anything for granted. Anyway, there was a man named Hugh Dowding, who was the Royal Air Force Marshal, who devised this system to get the British fighters up at the right time in the right place to down the Luftwaffe. Okay, then the second part of that I'm going to talk about now because I'm an American, I know more about it. And we'll get started, and I'll put my first slide up. Let's see. Okay, so this is since you're 2 3-way switches. Since you're Ludham people, I want to talk about the mission that was specific to Ludham, and it's the only one that I know in the 100th Bomb Group, and it had to do with the plane that my dad flew to bomb the submarine pens in Bremen, Germany. And then on his way back, he couldn't make it back to the Thorpe's Abbot where the 100th Bomb Group is, so he had to crash land at Ludham. And I appreciate your having that field here. The two websites that are pertinent here are the 100thbg.com, that's 100thbombgroup.com, that's the U.S. site, and then the British site for the museum is below that. Bremen mission occurred on October 8th. My dad's name was Everett. He passed in 2004. And Bremen was known as Flak City because there were 300 flak guns surrounding it, and subsequently caused a lot of damage. One thing that may make you famous, and is if this Bremen mission is likely to be featured on a TV series. Has anybody seen Band of Brothers? You've seen Band of Brothers? The same production company owned by Tom Hanks, the actor, is doing he wants to do a production on the air war. He has picked the 100th Bomb Group. If you'll recall, Band of Brothers was all about a certain company within the 101st Airborne, and they went through the war per episode. Well, what he wants to do is a series on the 100th Bomb Group. One of the pictures in that series will be this mission to Bremen, and I will be disappointed if he does not mention Ludham. So we'll see. And then throughout this presentation, I'm going to be showing you photographs and artwork. And the artwork was all to do with my dad's plane, which was called Just-a-snappin. So you know about the Battle of the Atlantic, where the German U-boats sunk merchant ships primarily coming to Britain, and they've sunk 3,500 merchant ships. This is a oil tanker, and that's why it's burning so brightly. But and they also sunk 150 or plus or minus a few warships. So it was a real problem, and that's why early on in the war, the 8th Air Force concentrated on submarines. The plane was called Just-a-snappin. It got its name because it went to bomb submarine pens out of France, on the coast of France, and it got injured and lost 2 engines, got out of formation, coming north, and it was slow, and when they got back, the other pilots were discussing, well, Blakely's plane was way behind us, and my dad said yes, and we were just a snapping at your heels. So that's how it had no artwork on it. In fact, it didn't even have the name, but it was known as Just-a-snappin. So what were hazards of B-17s? One is air. At sea level, it's easy to breathe. It's very difficult to breathe at 10,000 feet. At 15,000 feet, you could die. At 20,000 feet, if you don't have supplemental oxygen, you're going to die. So everybody on the plane had to be tethered to oxygen. The planes were not compressed like planes are now. Everybody had to have their own oxygen mask. If that oxygen mask was destroyed, you were out of luck. The second item is the cold. This was early in the war. 43 was relatively early in the war, before we had time to build up the 1,000 bomb raids. And gangrene was a big problem. And there was one of the nurses at the 100th Bomb Group that wrote about a guy that his nose froze off, his ears, his eyelids, his fingers, and his toes. And they had to take him into surgery and just remove all of that dead tissue. And they had what was called the Russian cure, which is the gangrene area would turn black and then purple, and after it turned purple, they could operate on it and do amputations. It was a big problem. The medical staff learned how to deal with this, and it was much less frequent, less later in the war. Flak was a big problem, and obviously the Luftwaffe, which I'll get into a little later. So, why was this mission famous? And the number one reason in my mind is 9 Nazi fighters were downed on this. The gunners did one heck of a job. And that's a record not only for this war or for any war, for a single plane to down that many enemy. 2 Nazi fighters were damaged. They successfully bombed the submarine pens. They did I don't know how much damage they did. They did some, but the roofs on those submarine pens were so thick it was hard to damage them. Just-a-snappin was the lead plane. This is the first day of Black Week. Black Week was the worst week in the history of American Air Forces in terms of percentage losses. And the first day was to Bremen. The second day was the Focke-Wulf factories at Marienburg. The third day was to Munster. And the fourth day was the second Schweinfurt. And there was a total of about 2,000 airmen lost in this week, which was a very big hit. And you have to remember, these are highly trained individuals, so it's even more of a loss when you lose an airman relative to others that require a little less training. 40% of the military budget in both the UK and in America was to airplanes. 40%. Oh, and for you, that's the most important thing. It crash landed right here. The awards, 4 Purple Hearts, that's our medal for being injured significantly. This Distinguished Service Cross is our nation's second highest medal after the Medal of Honor. And 3 Silver Stars were awarded. And then when they got done with the mission, the salvage crew counted over 800 holes in the plane. So I'm lucky to be here. So I want to dedicate this to the gunners because they made possible my presence. This was a typical German fighter attacking Just-a-snappin that day. It's a Messerschmitt 410. And it also looks just exactly like a Messerschmitt 210 and looks very similar to a Messerschmitt 110. It's a twin-engine fighter bomber. And now, any of your family related to someone that was in the Royal Observer Corps? We don't have any relatives of Royal Observer Corps? Okay, well, I'm going to train you to do Royal Observer Corps work. And what you needed to do is, planes came across the coast, you needed to tell if they were friend or foe, if they were enemy or not. And so people studied silhouettes. And this playing card on the left, of course, is the B-17, a 4-engine fighter with a tail like this, a little bump here, a little bump there. And that's a friend. And this is a Messerschmitt 210, which looks identical to a Messerschmitt 410 and similar to a Messerschmitt 110. And it looks like that with 2 engines in a high cockpit like that. So this is the most common German fighter, Messerschmitt Me-109. Very maneuverable. This was the fighter that you all beat in the Battle of Britain with the Spitfires and more importantly the Hurricanes. Okay, so one of the reasons I think this is going to be featured is Harry Crosby, who is my dad's navigator, and he wrote a book, and it was this book, Wing and a Prayer, published in 1993, and it's about all his missions during the war. He went on to become a professor in Boston after the war, and you can get this book on Amazon used. You can't buy it new anymore, but you can get it for $20 on Amazon. It's an excellent work. And then Donald Miller is my other reference source here. He wrote this book called Masters of the Air. It's called 8th Air Force in England, so you won't see Masters of the Air, but you'll see 8th Air Force by Donald Miller, an excellent book. This is a painting of my dad's plane. And there are several things to point out here. One is, we know this is early in the war because of this insignia indicated 1942-1943. After that time, the American insignia included some chevrons on the side with red and white stripes. So that's an early plane. This symbol up here, you see the square D? The D on a square background? That means that it's from the 100th Bomb Group. By the way, you know that this territory here, you're in Division 2 of the 8th Air Force. Division 2 was B-24s. So, and then south of you in Thorpe's Abbott was the 3rd Division, and east, I'm sorry, that way's west, was the 1st Air Division. And we know it's an early plane because it's camouflaged. It's olive drab on the top and white underneath, because at this point they didn't want the B-17s to be seen by the Luftwaffe. Things changed later in the war, and they didn't have paint because the planes were set up as bait. They were bait to draw the Luftwaffe up so that they could be destroyed prior to D-Day. That was all important, to destroy the Luftwaffe before June 1944. And the crew would consist of a navigator who had this clear bubble and best view on the front. I'm sorry, bombardier who was here with his Norton bomb sight, and right behind him was the navigator. That would be Harry Crosby. And then came the pilot and co-pilot, and right behind them is the top turret gunner and also the chief engineer on the plane. And then behind him would be the radio operator right here. And in between those two, this is where the bombs were kept. And then we have the radio operator, top gunner, and then the ball turret gunner underneath. And then there were two waist gunners, right and left, or port and starboard waist gunners. By the way, these were open to the air. It was like being in a convertible, and it could get down to 140 degrees below zero sometimes. So cold was a huge problem in the air. And then the tail gunner back here. So there were 10 individuals manning a B-17, sometimes 11 if there was a command pilot, which there was on this mission. And then, of course, here's the serial number, 23393, and you'll see that in these paintings that we know they're of Just-a-snappin because the serial number's there. The crew, I look at this crew, they're as young as when I was in high school. Never in the history of warfare was so much responsibility put in people so young. My dad was the oldest guy on the plane. He was 24. Bill McClellan was the ball turret gunner on the bottom of the plane. Harry Crosby, the navigator. Charlie Vi, the co-pilot. My dad, Everett, the pilot. The bombardier, Jim Douglas. Lester Saunders was a waist gunner. Monroe Thornton, the top turret engineer. Ed Yevich was the other waist gunner. Lyle Nord, the tail gunner, and Edmund Forkertner, the radio operator. And my dad and Douglas were good friends. They would go into London together because they both smoked. And they had nicknames for each other. Dad called Jim Douglas Brush because he had the mustache. And Douglas called my dad Skeleton because he was pretty skinny. So they palled together when they went into London. These two palled together when they went into London. They didn't smoke. And this photograph was taken, I think, the day before the mission. So we're very lucky. There were a lot of changes in crews, but this was the crew that actually went on the mission. up here you can see that the plane had flown 13 missions. Each little bomb signal means one mission. They got credit for a mission if they were shot at. If they weren't shot at, they didn't get a credit for the mission. And just below it are the number of Nazi fighters that they had downed in all their missions. So the takeoff was early in the morning, and up here you can see there's 23393, which was my dad's serial number. So we know this is a painting of that, which I found within the last 3 years. And it was a partially overcast, partially clear day, and the planes behind are waiting to take off. It was a dangerous period to take off and forming up, because you had to form up with other members of your squadron, and then you would form up with other members of the wing that you were in, and then you'd form up with the division, and then if there was more than one division, you'd form up with them. Here is a picture of how the form up went. Right here is the 100th Bomb Group. This right, the star is a radio beacon that was used for finding your way. So this little circle here represents where Thorpe's Abbots are. By the way, here's Norwich, so would this be correct? The 467th would be your closest group? Okay. So anyway, so here's the 100th and the 390th and the 95th. So the 100th would fly to here and then fly in this triangular pattern till all the other planes grouped up in formation. And they could easily hit some of these planes circling here, or even come into contact with this group. So it was not easy. They did not have radar at this time. And by the way, I want to thank you for the radar, because our radar is made possible by British inventions. Thank you. And that was late. It didn't help my dad on this mission, but it did. So they form up, and they over the channel they could relax a little bit. They could have a candy bar. They could have a sandwich, but most of the time the sandwiches were frozen. So they could relax for a little bit going over the channel. And then, actually I take that back, they didn't go over the channel, they went over the North Sea. And the route, here's whoops. So here's the Holland, and they come down to this point. At this point, they make a beeline for the target of Bremen, which is on the Weser River. So you had submarines coming all the way down this river to Bremen. There was not only submarine pens that they did fixing there, but there was also a submarine manufacturing facility in Bremen. So when they got to this point, which is called the initial point, then they had to go on the bomb run. And on the bomb run, the bombardier took control of the plane. I failed to mention this was a lead plane. A lead plane, when it drops its bombs, everyone else drops their bombs. When it goes left, all the planes behind it go left, and so forth and so on. They all did it based on the lead plane. So on the bomb run, the bombardier took 25 seconds before he could drop his bombs. He had to make calculations in the bomb sight. And it was the most dangerous time because they couldn't perform any evasive maneuvers to get out of the way of flak. And again, there were 300 flak guns around Bremen. And they were 88 millimeters for this particular height. And I remember my dad said the ack-ack was really bad around Bremen, and I thought he was talking about the sound it made, ack-ack-ack-ack-ack. But in reality, he was speaking German, because ack is the term for 8. So ack-ack would be an 88. And it's a contraction of Fliegerabwehrkanone, which means flight defense cannon. And it shot up a 25-pound shell, which exploded in the air, and it was very fast load. They could fire 20 rounds a minute in it because it would eject the casing after the bullets went out, and they could put in another one. It was a very efficient weapon. And over Bremen, the flak was just incredible. And if you were anywhere within 50 feet of where it exploded, you had some pretty severe damage. Before they got to the bomb site, they were hit by flak, and it put one of their number 2 engine out. And at 15:25, when Mr. Douglas put the bombs down, and there's this painting by an artist named Bill Cohen, and this is the bombardier, Douglas, Crosby the navigator, and what he's telling him, he said, I just dropped the bombs, and Crosby's recording the exact time. And Crosby had a lot of duty to keep the plane in the right place. Often when things went wrong, they blamed the navigator because he really had a difficult job. He has all these slide rules to deal with and needs to know where they are and where they're going. Then the radio operator, Faulkner, has to radio back to Bomber Command that they successfully dropped their bombs. At this point, Bill McClellan, who's in the ball turret position, and it's a very uncomfortable position, he reports that there's a lot of flak damage to the tail of the plane, and that his mechanism to his ball turret is disrupted, so he cannot turn freely. They were hit repeatedly by flak this day, and the question arises, why were they so much more successful this day than other days? Well, there's several reasons. One is the Germans had developed what's called a proximity fuse, which means when the shell gets up near a plane, it'll burst itself. That's a proximity fuse. Also, Hermann Göring said, you 88 gunners are not doing very well. If you don't do better, I'm going to send you to the Eastern Front. And that's a big motivator. Number 4 engine was out. It was a direct flak hit. Number 3 was on fire. And at this point, they're losing altitude and the plane is spinning. So it went down several thousand feet. They finally gained control of the airplane, and they notice the engine's still on fire, so they have to dive again several thousand feet. They were started at about 25,000, and now they're about 10,000. And so they dived to put the engine fire out, which was successful. And many of the control wires were smashed and out of order. And then they head back, and they were out of formation by this time. They only have 2 engines, so they're going slow. If you go 90 miles an hour, your plane falls out of the air. They were going 100 miles an hour, so they were barely staying in the air. And on the way back, it was the policy of the Luftwaffe to attack straggling planes. It's much easier to kill a straggling plane than it was one in formation. And ahead of them, they saw another B-17 that was in a similar situation with engines out, and it was attacked time after time by the Luftwaffe. It exploded, turned over, upside down, went down, and hit the ground. Nobody got out from that plane. After that, the same group of planes attacked Just-a-snappin, time after time after time. So what were the crew injuries? Well, first I just want to show you the control. See these wires? Can you see these wires up here? Those are control wires. That's what was shot up, and that's why it was so difficult to maneuver the plane. And it was a heck. So the first injuries were Ed Yevich, who a 20 millimeter cannon shell bounced off his gun and hit him in the arm. He fractured, had a lot of injuries to his forearm. And then Lester Saunders, the other waist gunner, well, he was shooting at a Messerschmitt, and the Messerschmitt was shooting at him at the same time, and they both killed each other. The Messerschmitt put a 20 millimeter cannon right in his gut, and he downed the Messerschmitt. This is my dad wrote an article for True magazine, published in 1944. Co-wrote it, I should say, and this is a drawing of what happened to Lester after he was shot. He went to the radio operator's compartment, and the radio operator put gauze over the wound trying to stop the bleeding. He put powder sulfanilamide on the wound, and he knew he needed to give him morphine. The morphine was frozen, so they thawed it out by putting it in his mouth until it turned to liquid, and then gave him morphine. And you can get an idea of these holes in the plane. You know, they're all over the plane. And it's just amazing to me that only one person on this mission died. I mean, how much? That's luck. That's pure luck. So, I failed to mention Lester Saunders, who's the man that died on the mission. He was the only man that had a full-time job before it. He was a bailiff in Chicago. The others were, too young either in school. Most of them were in school. Bill McClellan, who was the ball turret gunner, first he sustained a scalp injury, but it didn't penetrate his skull. Then he had a facial injury, and then a piece of flak came through his ball turret and hit him in the thigh. He was concerned, and it was a fairly big hole. He was concerned that the bone was fractured. So he puts his hand or his fingers in there to feel his femur, and finally says, "Oh, I'm okay. The bone's not broken." Charlie By, the co-pilot, was in the back with tail gunner duties as well as formation control officer. He sustained a hit right here, and then he sustained a much bigger wound to his. It went through his hip and to his sacrum, and he had foot drop the rest of his life and walked with a limp. So the gunnery, Monroe Thornton was the best shot that day. He downed 3 Nazi fighters. One, everybody saw the propeller. He hit the propeller of the fighter, and it fell off, and the plane fell out of the air. The second Nazi he got was the plane exploded, so they confirmed that. And the third one was going over the border of Holland. He's the top, and this is a painting depicting his action. Here he is here. This engine is on fire. Here he is here shooting at the ME-410. The ME-410 shooting back at Just-a-snappin. And this is just a close-up of the same thing with him firing. And he got credit for 3 that day. The ball turret gunner McClellan got credit for 2 that day. And this was a very cold position, as you can imagine, sitting on the bottom of the plane. And what he had done, he had learned a little trick to stay a little warmer. He plugged up these exit points where the bullets were expended, the cartridge casings were expended, and he would keep them in this compartment to stay warm, and he would hug them with his hands when the fighters weren't approaching. And he did all this with a big wound in his thigh, and his scalp was injured. And this is a painting of the WWII is shooting in the tail gunner's position here at this Messerschmitt, and Nord is firing at the same Messerschmitt from that position. So I was totally surprised at the number of paintings that I found of Just-a-snappin. And then the last Messerschmitt down was Messerschmitt 109, shot by the tail gunner Charlie WWII, and this shows that this engine is totally stopped. This one is windmilling, they're both out, and these two are working. And the plane was on its side so much that the navigator could not use the compass. The compass is, like on a boat, it's floating in oil, and it got stuck on the side. So, Thornton got 3, McClellan 2, WWII 2, Saunders and Nord 1 each. And I'm hoping that the TV movie about this will make it much more dramatic than what I can do. And Douglas and Crosby were each credited with damaging planes. Now, how do we know that this can be confirmed? And we do it by look at this is German Air Force losses from the Germans on that day. And these planes right in here are the ones that Just-a-snappin shot down. And then here is the plane limping back to England, trying to make it to Thorpe's Abbott, but making it to Ludham. As they left Holland and were out over the North Sea, they had to decide what to do. The plane was badly damaged, difficult to aim. They thought about crash landing in Germany and getting pay. Apparently, you got pay if you were a prisoner of war. You got paid for the whole time you were a prisoner. They decided against that in a millisecond. They thought about ditching in the North Sea and using the rafts to stay alive until they could be salvaged. And they sent Douglas back to look at the dinghy, and the dinghy was full of holes, so they couldn't do that. So they decided they had to go across the North Sea, and they were losing altitude. They were down to 800 feet. In fact, they were so low that soldiers on the ground were shooting at them with regular rifles. So out over the water, they needed to lighten the load. They threw away all their guns, then the ammunition, then the bomb sight, the camera, anything they could throw out the windows to lose weight. And they gained 300 feet. And they got over the water, and the first and only runway they could see was here at Ludham. So they decided to crash land at Ludham. Okay, so now that I trained you how to be a royal observer, is it you're watching this plane come over the sea? Is this a friend or a foe? It's a foe. That's right. That's a Messerschmitt. Yes. Okay, so there are many photographs of the plane. It hit the ground, came across, not on a runway, but across the grass, and then it hit about the only significant tree in the. It was totally out of control. When it landed, it had its wheels down, but hydraulics immediately failed, and it was a belly landing right after that. It hit the tree, the only big tree in the whole runway. Was going 50 miles an hour when it hit this tree, and it came quite close to, here's my dad's seat right here, it came quite close to hitting that. And so it was, I thank my lucky stars that he didn't, or the plane didn't hit him, or the tree didn't hit him. The salvage crew came, and this was a flak hole that was in the, what's called the rudder. This is the elevator, which controls whether or not the plane can go up and down. So that's one of the reasons it had trouble. And you could see many, many little holes here. And the smallest holes are machine gun bullets, and the larger ones are 20 millimeter cannon. And the salvage crew counted over 800 holes in the plane. So we're all lucky to be here. And so after the mission, 4 people went to the hospital, I guess in Norwich. Saunders was alive. He's the man hit in the gut. He died a week later in the hospital. Vi was taken to the hospital and then to the United States to be treated in Washington area. Yevich, same thing. And McClellan was in the hospital for 24 months after this. And then the rest of them went back to Thorpe Abbott's. And when they got back there, they'd been gone for a while. And it was the policy of the Air Force to remove all their belongings if they weren't there. So when they got back, their foot lockers, all their pictures on the wall were gone. And they were in the process of being sent back to their families because they were missing. This is the last piece of artwork I have. This is my nephew's shoulder. It's pretty good. That's a pretty good rendition. Okay, so I talked about Black Week. October 8th was Bremen. 9th was Focke-Wulf Factory in Marienburg. 10th was Munster, when there were 250,000 German soldiers that came and through Bremen at one time or another. They had 25 different divisions there. And October 14th was the 2nd Schweinfurt mission, which is the ball bearing factory at Schweinfurt. And almost 100 Nazi fighters were downed. So, this is, I don't know how to start. This is my daughter, her granddaughter. And can you hit a button?
Stop it.
Click on it. No.
I'll click on it.
Just, yeah. Make it full screen.
Full screen.
Now, just click any place in it.
No.
Okay, well, forget about it. Anyway, it's about 2 weeks old. It's the first time she rolled over. So this is Lester Saunders' grave at the Cambridge American Cemetery. We visited with my brother Spence, and we're grateful for his service. So I wanted to thank everybody, and that's that. Now I've got some other interesting stories if you have time, but yes, I just turned the lights on anyway. I have to show you Bill Buck's work. So Bill Buck did this where the Ludham Airfield was, and here's the runway that you know exists today with the hangar at the end of it. And right about here is where the tree was. Now, back in latter part of last year, I I sent the 100th Bomb Group a note, and I said, well, is that tree still there? And so a research group looked into it, and they came up here, and they said, yes, oh, we found it, and it's got a picture of the tree that they found with a big gash in it. And hopefully we can get this on your website, a big gash. And so they said, oh, the tree's here. And I said, they let me know, and I said, well, I have to come to Ludham. I mean, I have to see this tree. And so then about a month later, they did more research, and they found that was a fake tree. That was not the tree. And they used triangulation of the photographs at the time of the crash. They found certain structures, and they matched them up with existing structures now. They used trigonometry, and they figured out that was not the tree. That was a fake tree. So, but we know the site. And Bill helped with that, and thank you very much. And so we're very impressed. Now I'll tell you about another mission. And it was a month before this mission, and people like this because it's politically correct. So one night, Harry Crosby, the navigator, goes back to the Quonset hut, and he brought with him a record player, a Victrola. And he had 10 albums. He had Beethoven, John Philip Sousa, Bing Crosby. He had several albums. But he decides to put on Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And he listens and goes to sleep. Well, at 3 o'clock in the morning the next day, they wake the whole crew up and they say, you're leading a mission to Germany. And so they put their clothes on and they go have breakfast and go to the briefing room and find out the target, get in the planes, get over Germany in formation, and get ready for the bomb drop. And they get on the bomb run, and when that happens, they open up the bomb bay doors, the plane shudders a little bit, it slows down, and the bombardier looks down, and the target is cloudy. Well, the policy at that time was you only drop bombs on things you could see. So they couldn't see the target. They closed the bomb bay doors and went on to the secondary target. And they get on the bomb run for the secondary target, get over the site, open up the bomb bay doors. Same problem, it's cloudy. They can't drop their bombs. So now they're still exposed to the Luftwaffe. They want to get out of there. And they look for what's called a target of opportunity. And they go on and you see a clear area and there's a railroad marshalling yard. Well, so they decide, well, we're going to bomb this thing. And they get out, same thing, bomb run, open up the bomb bay doors. Harry Crosby, the navigator, looks at his map. He sees this is the city of Bonn, Germany, B-O-N-N, Germany. And he says, we can't bomb this. And everybody says, well, why not? Why the heck? And he says, well, this is where Beethoven was born. This is where Beethoven grew up, went to university, learned how to play the piano. They closed the bomb bay doors and went on to another target. Well, it turns out Bonn, Germany was never bombed much during the war. And it became the capital of Germany from 1949 to 1980, at which time Berlin became the capital. So Harry Crosby said after that the only reason was when he was looking at his, when he was listening to the music, he read the cover on the album and it had a biography of Beethoven. And he said, you know, he grew up in Bonn. He went, there was a good university there, and so they didn't bomb Bonn, Germany. So that's the only other story. Do y'all have any questions?
Tell them, I'm sure you were there.
Yeah, tell us about.
It's not. Well,
No, that's a different plane. But tell us about that plane.
Well, this one.
Yes.
same similar thing. Came in, went to land in the Ludham corner of the airfield, never touched car till he got nearly to where the gas site now is. Then he went, hit the ground, went across that was the road there, what's now the railway line, all the fence and wires and whatnot, and ended up in the farmyard at that corner.
Oh my God. Tell us your name.
Terry Gibbs, my name.
Terry Gibbs, okay.
That would have been around about the same time. And
Right.
this one is 433, and one wing came off and went lodged up in no tree there, so your one was with a tree. And these lads were taking the current off the end, and your American boys, we were sliding down the wing in the little stitches. And they kept going in and said, "Want some candy?" I reckon we had more chocolate than any chicken in all.
Right.
And that was there for about 4 days. Now he took it to pieces and took it away. I know who that woman is standing there. She was there as well when we were all looking at her. Her name was Nellie Miller, and she knew anyone knew her. Lived in the first council house we brought to England. But I can't remember who the other one was. And all the other boys in my class at school at the time and all that, are no longer with us. That's only me left.
Oh,
So,
well, thank you. Thank you. Well, you all know that Ludham Field was built for fighters,
yeah.
and a bomber required a lot longer runway. So, yeah, so that, I mean, a bomber would typically overshoot the.
Yeah, they took the runway out for about 2 days, and they threw down and took some of the lines up and
Well, my wife and I are grateful for your hospitality. Everyone we've met has been so easy to talk to. I just enjoy going to dinner and talking to the people next to us. And I thank you for Winston Churchill. And I love watching Prime Minister's questions. I love watching Prime Minister's questions. And
But your Prime Minister is much more eloquent than our President. She can hold her off verbally, and I can't say the same.
I'd like to say thank you very, very much. You're very, very
Thank you.
interesting and entertaining
I
talk.
better take
And this
picture
is just a
here.
little gift from the archive.
Oh, well,
this
thank
is our
you.
new book.
The one you sold.
With the one we've been selling.
Oh,
yes.
thank you.
Thank you.